My grandpa Brian struggled with a speech disorder since he was a small boy. He couldn't speak clearly, making it difficult for those around him to understand him. For example, he would talk in third person and it would be really difficult to understand him. I don't know how far away his birthday was from his due date, I just know that he had a speech disorder. Studies have shown that if a baby was born prematurely, they are at risk of having a speech impairment. According to UK Healthcare 2023, all babies that were born prematurely, 4 to 6 weeks early, are at risk of having serious health problems. Some have breathing problems, feeding problems, and effects on brain functions. Others can be born with speech impairments. I was born 4 weeks and 6 days premature and weighed 6 pounds and 2 ounces. Since I was born that early, I won the speech impairment lottery. Being born prematurely can cause your language development to be delayed. Raising Children Network 2023 says, most premature babies develop language in the same way as term babies, but their language development might be delayed. They might have more trouble speaking and understanding what's said to them compared to babies that were born at term. Not only can you get a speech impairment from being a preemie, speech impairments run through the family blood and affect how people say different sounds. Some people can't say the L sound or the R sound. I started with not being able to say the L, TH, SH, CH, and R sounds. It took me 13 years to be able to say these sounds, and the R sound is what I most struggled with. So, when a sentence like this came up in read aloud in 4th grade, yeah. People with speech disorders are usually overlooked. Today, we'll talk about what a speech disorder is, the different types, and how people struggle with them. Next, we talked about how a person gets a speech disorder. Lastly, we'll talk about different treatments for speech disorders. First, let's start with what a speech disorder is. Cleveland Clinic 2023 says speech impairment or speech disorder happens when your child can't speak or can't speak so people understand what they're saying. There just isn't one type of speech disorder, there are multiple different kinds. For example, I have a speech impairment. My grandpa had Illism. Illism is not a speech disorder in a traditional sense, but it can be used for emotional regulation and development phase in children. Elmo from Sesame Street also has it. Other types of speech disorders are stuttering, lisp, active entry, and dysphagia. Speech impairment is when your child can't speak or can't speak so people understand what it's saying. Elmer Fudd had a speech impairment known as ricosism, with the inability to pronounce the letter R. This is a specific type of speech impairment where the R sounds are replaced, most commonly with W sounds, as seen where he says rabbit for rabbit. Ricosism can also affect the pronunciation of L sounds, or W sound, is most prominent characteristic of Elmer's speech pattern. Stuttering includes repeating words or sounds, blocking out what you want to say because you have a difficulty with a sound and stretching out words. Stuttering isn't always based on genetics. People can stutter based on their feelings, like being frustrated. President Joe Biden had a stutter during his presidential debates. A list is where a person struggles with saying S or Z. It can cause a slushy or spitty sound during speech. Donald Duck has a list. Active entry refers to impairment of motor skills that affect an individual's ability to form the sound and speech correctly. Dysphagia is a muscle weakness in the person's face, lips, tongue, throat, or chest. Symptoms may include slurred speech, mumbling, and speaking too fast or too slow. People with speech disorders have most trouble socializing, especially young children. When I was younger, I got frustrated at people if they didn't understand me when I tried to tell them something. Young children tend to show their feelings by getting upset when someone can't understand them. Teens and adults don't show their feelings, but they become more apparent of their troubles with communication skills. They get bullied and people think that are dumb. The National Library of Medicine conducted a study to explore the social and interaction experience with Iceland's remote speech disorders include that participants reported that the impact of motor speech disorders became more apparent in Iceland's than in earlier childhood. Teens become more apparent of their troubles with communication skills because young children sometimes haven't fully grasped the concept of speech disorder. Since young children don't fully grasp the concept, they tend to show their feelings. They can end up yelling to the person they're talking to if they can't understand them. 1 in 10 school-age children go to speech therapy to help with their speech impairments. They are given exercises such as flashcards or tongue movements to help them. 75% of kids have their speech disorders resolved by the end of high school. So, did you just win the speech impairment lottery? Good news, you can either be born with it or get it later in life. Let's start with factors that make a person be born with a speech disorder. These include being born prematurely, having a low birth rate, and they can run through the family. Low birth rate children receive therapy rather than a normal birth rate child. A survey from a low birth rate linked to communication problems in children says, compared to children who were born at a normal birth rate, low birth rate children were 2 to 3 times more likely to have received speech language therapy. Why about 14.5% of children with a history of a normal birth rate received speech language therapy by age 10? About 28% of children with a history of moderate or low birth rate and 39% of children with extremely low birth rate have received therapy. Speech disorders can run through the family, but they don't get passed down every generation. My grandpa had one, and I had one, but neither my parents nor my sister had a speech disorder. The FOXP2 gene is a gene that provides instructions to make a protein. The inheritance of this gene depends on the specific genetic change that has happened. Even if a person has a speech disorder now, but they weren't born with it, they can get one later in life. One factor that causes you to get a speech disorder is having a stroke. The Stroke Association says, when we communicate, our brain has to complete a series of tasks. Different parts of our brain are responsible for each one of these tasks. If one of these parts is damaged by a stroke, it can cause problems with communication. Now, this isn't true for everybody. My older sister had a stroke when she was just a few hours old, but she never had a speech disorder. She does stutter every once in a while, but it's not every day that affects her. Having a traumatic brain injury can also cause you to have a speech disorder. It can cause you to have more trouble speaking, understanding speech, and trouble participating in conversations. Now, let's look at some treatments for speech disorders. One example is the government program Birth to Three. Birth to Three is an early intervention system for infants and toddlers with development delays or disabilities. It is used to detect speech disorder early when kids are still learning language. Another example is seeing a speech therapist in elementary school. Speech therapist helps kids with the skills to use speech sound while incorporating games into it. For example, when I was in elementary school, I would play hot potato by reading flashcards. Weber articulation is a famous set that all therapists use. Today, we talked about what a speech disorder is, the different types, and how people struggle with them. Next, we talked about how a person gets a speech disorder. Lastly, we ended with talking about different treatments for speech disorders. Everybody struggles with something. Most people struggle with speech disorders. It may limit people not to be able to say certain words or sounds, but they don't let it stop them. My speech impairment didn't stop me from going out for speech and debate. It made me a more confident speaker. People are not defined by having speech disorders. As it says in the 1946 murder mystery, Murder in the Glass Room by Lester Fuller and Endon Roof, you can never tell a book by its cover.